Today I'm going to be tier ranking all 38 horror books I read in 2023. If you watched my recent video where I tier ranked all the mystery and thriller books that I read in 2023, then this tier list will look familiar to you. If you missed that video, go check it out. I'll have it linked down below as well. The only difference between my tier list for horror books and mystery thriller is this second tier from the top, which I call It Delivered. Specifically for horror books, sometimes it just feels weird to use particular language of enjoyment, and so I like to use this terminology, It Delivered, because some of the books I read are wildly disturbing and I would feel weird saying that I thought it was great and I loved it. So It Delivered just means it did what it set out to do, it was effective, and I rated it highly. So let's jump on in. First up we have Rouge by Mona Awad, which is a more recent read for me, and this book is probably just going to be in the totally fine category for me. This was not my favorite Mona Awad. I thought it was fine. It did all of the things it set out to do. It didn't pack the biggest punch for me, but I did enjoy it. I had a good time reading it, and I thought it had some really weird things going on at the end that I did enjoy, but it was just fine for me. The Center is a book I recently read and really loved. I'm gonna put this in a new favorite. I did end up putting it at the very top of my bookshelf, which is where I put my favorite books, so I feel good calling it a new favorite. I thought this book was so interesting. It had a great concept. It was written wonderfully. I was very intrigued while reading it, and this was this author's debut novel, so I'm very excited to see what they do next. Next up is Earthlings by Sayaka Murata, and this one is going to go in It Delivered for me. It's not an all-time favorite. It is a disturbing book, and it is a perfect example of what It Delivered means. If you've read this book and you know the ending of it, you will understand just where I come from in this mindset. But interesting story. It was very intriguing. I had no idea where it was going to go, and by the end, I was impacted for sure. Next is Last to Leave the Room by Caitlin Starling, and this one I'm just gonna say is totally fine. It had such a cool concept, but unfortunately it just didn't pack the punch I was looking for it to. But I definitely would read more from this author in the future because I did really like the writing style of it and I really liked the concept. It was just a pacing and plot thing really that made the book not as wonderful for me. Next is The Salt Grows Heavy, and this one I'm gonna have to say don't recommend. It's very short, but it's just, there's nothing about it that would really make me recommend it. Next is The Vessel by Adam Neville, and this one I'm going to say it was fine. I don't have the strongest memory of it because it didn't leave a huge impact on me, but I thought the writing was good. I'm interested in reading more from the author. It was an interesting concept what he was doing with this story in particular by writing it like the experience of viewing a movie where you don't get the characters' inner thoughts, but I just thought it was fine. Next is To Be Devoured, and this one I don't recommend. I know a lot of people like it, but I did not. Next is Sucker by Daniel Hornsby, and I really enjoyed this one. I'm gonna put it in It Delivered. It's not super popular. It has a really low average rating, but I liked it. I think if you like kind of weird satire, psychological type of books, that you might enjoy it as well. Gerald's Game by Stephen King. I'm gonna say don't recommend this one either. I didn't realize how much of this was going to be about sexual abuse, and I just did not enjoy reading it, and I don't recommend it. A Touch of Jen, this one I am going to put in I Forgot That You Existed because I have kind of blacked this book out of my memory. I so desperately wanted to love this book because so many people don't like it, and I thought it sounded cool and I wanted to be an advocate for it and help it find its audience, and I thought it would be me. It wasn't me. This book spirals into a very weird direction. The first half and the second half kind of feel like two different books, and it just didn't work. Next is Hemlock Island, and this one I'm gonna say don't recommend. And so far this is not looking super good. This is very heavily weighted on the bottom. I did not like this book. I thought it was silly and not in a good way. Moon of the Crusted Snow, this one was really good. I'm gonna put this in It Delivered. It's a super slow burn, post-apocalyptic, quiet kind of horror novel, but super great atmosphere, very well written, very eerie, and the ending is like, ooh. Mr. Magic, I'm gonna have to put this one in don't recommend. It's not even that all these books in the don't recommend were necessarily a 1-star. The Salt Grows Heavy was a 2, To Be Devoured was a 1, Gerald's Game was a 1 or a 2, Hemlock Island was a 1, Mr. Magic I think was a 2, but I just don't really I don't really know who to recommend this to. I didn't love it. I like the idea of it. I didn't love the execution of it. For the negative, this one I really enjoyed, and I'm gonna put it in It Delivered. I thought about putting it in a new favorite, but I don't know. It doesn't feel like it quite reached that level for me, but it was very fun. It was a great homage to horror movies, like classic horror movies and slashers, and it was just a really fun time. 19 Claws and the Blackbird, I'm gonna have to put this in I Forgot That You Existed. It's a collection of super short stories by the same author as Tender is the Flesh. And some of these stories are like 1 to 2 pages, very, very brief, because there's 19 stories in it and it's like under 200 pages, I think. It's pretty short. And I just don't have a super strong memory of it. I read it really fast because it was so short, and it just, like, nothing about it stands out to me in my memory. Helpmeet, I thought this was fine. It's a really short novella, and I heard really good things about it. It's like a body horror, kind of historical type of really short little horror novella. Interesting concept, interesting execution. Didn't really leave much of an impact on me. The Book of the Most Precious Substance, I did enjoy this one quite a bit. I'm gonna put it in It Delivered. I thought it was really intriguing. The writing style of it in general, something about the voice just like really captivated me and pulled me into the story. It kind of reminds me of like a Mona Awad book because it just takes you on this weird kind of mystical journey with a character. Not a new favorite, but very good. The Trees Grew Because I Bled There. This one is going in I Forgot That You Existed. I can no longer distinguish Eric LaRocca's works. The only one I can distinguish is Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, which is the first one I read from him. I've read almost everything else that he's come out with since then, and they're all an enjoyable time while I'm reading them, but they're not super memorable separately for me anymore at this point after reading so many of them. I will probably keep reading from this author, but I am looking for something a little bit more memorable. Next is Revelations. This is an anthology of short stories from a bunch of different horror authors, and the proceeds of it went to a foundation that is all about action for climate change. I think this is actually the least rated book that I read all year. Goodreads just recently came out with the whole year in books thing, and it'll tell you like what's your most popular book you read, what's the shortest book, the longest book. And I think this is the book that had the fewest amount of ratings, if I'm remembering correctly. More people should read it because there's some good stories in it. I don't remember a lot about it, but it was for a good cause, and there were a couple of stories that I do remember out of it, and it helped introduce me to a couple of authors that I had never read from before that I'm now seeking out more of their work, so I'm gonna put it in Totally Fine. Next up is Lakewood. I thought this was really good. I'm gonna put it in It Delivered. That was my second book from Megan Giddings, and so far for me, Megan Giddings can do no wrong. Next up is Cabin at the End of the World. This was a reread for me this year because the movie came out at the beginning of the year, so I did decide to reread the book. This has always been a favorite horror book of mine in my mind. The very first time I read it, it was a 5-star, amazing, blew me away. Rereading it this year, I did like it a little bit less. I would give it more of a 4-star if I were just encountering it for the first time, but it holds a special place in my heart, so I'm gonna have to put it in the top tier category. And if you're wondering how I felt about the adaptation, I did do a whole dedicated video comparing the book to the movie if you want to go check that out. Pinata, I thought this was fine. I don't have very strong feelings for it, positive or negative. I just thought it was fine. I feel very similarly about The Spite House. I also just sort of thought it was fine. It wasn't necessarily up my alley of the stuff that I love to read, but I thought it was done fine. Patricia Wants to Cuddle. This one, I don't know. I don't remember what rating I gave it when I read it. I gave it either a 2 or a 3. I think it's a fine book. You just have to know what you're getting yourself into when you're reading it, because it's just a weird book that it's kind of horror, kind of satire, but it just fits in that bucket of weirdness, but it's not like a fun weird. Like, it doesn't get too weird. It's just like a surface level weird. It's like intro to weird books. And I like for weird books to be really bizarre, and this one's just like surface level weird, and it was fine. Tell Me I'm Worthless. This one, I'm just gonna put it in I Forgot That You Existed because I don't think about this book often. It was a bizarre experience reading it. It doesn't feel like anything else that I've read. I didn't particularly enjoy it. I didn't hate it. It just wasn't for me. A History of Fear. This book I wanted to love. I loved the concept of it, but I didn't love the execution of it. I do think it's fine overall, but it's also not the most memorable for me. Linghan, I really, really enjoyed. I am honestly gonna put this in a new favorite because if I'm recommending horror novellas, that's at the top of my list now. It is this gothic weird kind of story about grief, and there's definitely a weird element to it. I don't like to say too much about it because it's so brief that I like for people to just jump into it not knowing exactly what's going on, because that's some of the fun of it, is just piecing together the world you're in and what's happening. But I thought that was really solid. Our Wives Under the Sea, this one I'm gonna put in It Delivered. I do think this one was good. It's not a new personal favorite of mine. It's also about grief. I think it's beautifully written. It just wasn't like a book that blew me away. Our Share of Night, this book I did really enjoy. I gave it a 4 or a 4.5, and I did vote for it all the way through in the Goodreads Choice Awards this year for the horror category. I don't know that it feels like a favorite to me. I think I'm just gonna put it in It Delivered. The Venue by TJ Payne is a personal favorite. I had so much fun with that one. It's one of those books that could kind of split like horror or thriller because it's kind of both. I just ended up putting it in the horror category. It is campy, it's cheesy, it is fun. It's just a fun time. Jawbone was such a strange experience. I think like broadly, like I kind of want to put it in don't recommend, because I would not recommend this broadly. I would recommend this to a very specific type of reader. I can't really put it in I forgot that you existed because I do remember it. I don't think I would say it was fine because it just didn't like all come together for me. So I'm just gonna put it in don't recommend, but just know I do recommend it, but to a very specific type of reader who reads very specific types of weird horror books. Foe is a new favorite. I like everything I read from Ian Reid. I read that early in the year and I really enjoyed it. Didn't like the adaptation as much. The movie just came out recently. Definitely prefer the book. I thought the adaptation was fine, but in general I do prefer the book. Looking Glass Sound by Katrina Ward is also a new favorite. I really love that one. I think that's going to probably be an unpopular opinion because it's just kind of weird and kind of boring, but it just worked really well for me. Walking Practice is a book I wanted to love, but it just didn't do it for me. So I'm gonna put it in don't recommend. I gave it a 2-star, like I didn't hate it, but it had such a cool concept of this alien coming to Earth and they can kind of shapeshift and they have to eat humans to stay alive and they are learning how to walk, hence the title Walking Practice. But what started very interesting and had a great character voice, I didn't feel like I got a lot out of the whole story together. I liked the idea of it. By the end of it, I was like, I don't know about this one. Camp Damascus, I thought this one was good, but I don't think I would say it's great. I'm gonna put it in totally fine for me, but I will say a lot of people really enjoyed it this year, so I do recommend checking it out if it sounds interesting to you. This Is Where We Talk Things Out. I think this one delivered. I think I gave it a 4-star when I read it. It's just a little horror novella. You kind of can tell where it's gonna go. Like, it's not the most surprising thing, but it was well written. It intrigued me. I liked it. I had a good time with it. Mayfly, I'm also gonna say it delivered because I'm kind of traumatized from this book, and if just looking at this book can remind me of the way I felt reading some of the scenes in this book, like, yeah, it did what it was trying to do. I have been impacted by it. And then She Is a Haunting. I thought this one was just fine. It's a YA horror book, and I'm kind of out of my YA time in my life recently. I only read a handful of YA books this year. I'm not really interested in picking YA up right now. I don't think that means forever. I'm just like not in a YA phase at this moment. And so I thought this book was fine for me, and that's where it belongs. So that is it for tier ranking all of my horror books from 2023. I'm kind of surprised how many ended up in the don't recommend category. I thought I had a good year of reading horror, and I guess mostly I did. Like, a lot are totally fine, it delivered, or a new favorite, but there were like some big misses for me in the ones that I did not like. They're books I really disliked, but the books that I liked are books that I really liked. So I guess it all balances it out. Let me know what you thought about this tier ranking. Let me know if you plan on picking up any of the books that ended up in my higher tiers. Let me know if anything surprised you where it ended up being placed on my list, and let me know if you have any additional recommendations for me based off the books that ended up in my new favorite top tier list, because I always love getting new book recommendations. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.